Hi, Jim in Los Angeles here, and I'm going to attempt to show you how to program the Moog Minimoog Voyager with the siren-like sound you hear at the beginning of Hoedown by Emerson, Lake and Palmer from their album Trilogy. It's a pretty complex sound, and what we want is that when we sound the A below middle C, we want three oscillators to sound a D. We want two of those to sweep all the way up the keyboard, a little past the high A, drop back down to the A, and then when we release the key, everything to go back down to D almost immediately. And there's a caveat in that we can't set oscillator 1 to sound a D when we play an A without going into the master program and globally lowering the whole instrument. It's not what I want to do, but it's something we have to do. So we go into master, scroll to transpose, select that with enter, and then lower the value 7 semitones down from A to a D. 7 semitones down below. When you're done with that, hit enter and back to panel. Now we're going to do some initial settings. I've got one of the Moog default programs called up, and incidentally, now when I play A, you can hear D on the organ below, or on the synthesizer. So I'm going to set some initial switches here, and you'll notice that I wiggle the knobs and rock the rocker switches to get there, because you need to wake these switches up on a Voyager. It has a real panel mode where it'll actually play what the knobs are set at, but most people are going to bring up the default program and go from there. So as Bill Himseth and Dr. Moog would want us to do, let's go from left to right. We're not going to be using the LFO, no vibrato kind of thing, so that's not important. We want to make sure the mod wheel is off. We also want to make sure that the mod wheel modulation bus is turned down. Want to set, leave the fine tune where it's at for now. Glide rate all the way off. Want to cycle the glide switch to make sure it's off. I want to cycle the release switch and make sure it's on. Again, the mod wheel down. Modulation 2 bus is really important. This is the one we're going to use to shape the pitch of the sweep. And we're going to do that by setting it to the source to modulation 2 on, so that this is the mod bus that's internally going to be doing the work. We want to set the destination to be the pitch of the oscillators, and then we want to do the shaping of the pitch with the filter envelope. So source, modulation bus 2, destination, pitch, shaping, filter envelope. We want the amount, this is very important, we want the amount to be all the way down initially, because we don't want any modulation affecting the pitch tuning as we set the oscillators. Speaking of the oscillators, let's set number 1 at 8 feet. We want a sawtooth wave. The waveform's a variable on a Voyager, so try to get as accurate sawtooth as you can, as it would have been on the modular, I believe. Oscillator 2 is 8 feet for now. We'll get back to that later. And we also want it to be set to sawtooth. We want oscillator 3 to be 4 foot and set to sawtooth. The switches down below, we want to make sure that sync is off, that FM is off. We don't want oscillator 3 to follow the keyboard. So we want to make sure that oscillator 3 keyboard control is set to off. Any note we play on the keyboard, we want to be that 4 foot D no matter what. Oscillator 3 frequency, we want to be in the audible range. We don't want it in low range, as you would use it as an LFO for vibrato or so. And so we want to set that to high so that we hear it as a normal 4 foot oscillator. Continuing to the right, let's wake up the mixing section here. Let's set the initial values to something around 7, just kind of a nominal thing. There's no external input, but let's make sure it's off. Same with noise, make sure it's off. Good measure. The filter, Hoedown is a pretty bright sound. It doesn't use much cutoff, so let's set that almost fully open. Let's set it at 12K. It's on the dial. Spacing's a cool effect, but let's leave it in the middle for now. We're not worried about it for this sound. Resonance we want off for now. We might suit to taste a little later. Keyboard contour amount, we want that in the middle. We want to be using the dual low-pass filters, not the high-pass and low-pass filters over here. So we cycle that switch and leave it at dual low pass, so the oscillators go through the low pass filter. As far as the filter envelope that's going to be doing all the work, let's initially set it to 0, all parameters, with the exception of the amount to filter. We can leave that in the middle. The amplitude envelope, we want it to be instant on, so instant attack, no decay, full sustain, and a release time of about 1 second. Later on you'll see that when we release and everything drops down to D, you want it to ring out a bit but not overlap the organ when it comes in. So with the switches also, this switch, the keyboard or external trigger, we want that to be set to keyboard so that when we play the keyboard it sounds a note. So now let's turn oscillator 1 on. You see that it plays the D. And let's make sure oscillator 2 is in sync with it. Initially we want to try to get this very accurate. Later we can adjust it for some beating and some detuning and so forth. But for now, let's try to get it pretty accurate. And then oscillator 3, you can see here, no matter what note, we get that high D. So I think we're good on that. Actually, we want to make sure that, we want to see how oscillator 3 sounds with 2. So now we have all 3 oscillators tuned together. Now for some fun. We're going to start to sculpt the pitch of the oscillators with modulation. So I'm going to now turn, I had you tune oscillator 1 and 2 at the same foot length so you could accurately do so, but now we want to drop it down 2 levels down to 32 foot to where we hear this. But we want to bring it up an octave to where it sounds like this. So I'm going to do that with the amount knob of the modulation bus. And you can tune that to the D that keeps its place. That said, now the real fun begins when you use the sustain of the filter envelope to bring the pitch all the way up to a high A, like I think it's 19 semitones, all the way up, and then lands on an A up here. What we're looking for is the D to be playing a D and the sculpted A to be playing a fifth higher. It's starting to sound familiar now. Now the real fun starts to happen when you start messing with some of the other parameters of the envelope. We want decay to turned up to about 10 milliseconds, or about 15, to where you start to hear a little 100th of a second sort of meow. And then we'll adjust the attack for basically the tempo of the song. The original recording was pretty slow. The live Welcome Back My Friends recording is pretty fast, but let's bring the slope up. that's essentially the settings of the pitches. Now we want to play with the mixer a little bit. Let's bring that D down to where it's more like the record and pretty much just barely there. Oscillator 2, we'll leave it at 6, and oscillator 1 is the high one, so let's give it a little punch up to around 8. You know, I don't actually have that set to the high A. Bring that back down. Turn oscillator 1 on. So there you have it. I hope you had great success trying to do this. I'm going to try to put out a little written word on the web, on Facebook, Emerson, Lake and Palmer Appreciation Group. A couple of notes on what's going on here. But again, what you're trying to do is when you play an A, it sounds 3 D oscillators, 2 sweep up to the high A, and then drop back down.